There are places that exist outside reality. A quiet mall, a hidden bar down a forgotten alley. In those places, you're not just a stranger. You're prey. And to survive, you must follow the rules. Rules that seem absurd, until breaking one puts your life at risk. 2 stories. One chilling truth: never break the rules. Story 1. The night mall has rules. I've worked as a security guard for most of my adult life. It's not glamorous by any means. No action scenes, no high-tech gadgets like in the movies. Mostly it's long nights, fluorescent lighting, coffee that tastes like old pennies, and the occasional drunk trying to sleep behind a dumpster. Gas stations, convenience stores, strip malls, I've done them all. The kind of places that get quiet after 10 p.m., where your main task is staying awake and making sure nothing walks off the shelves. But when I saw the ad for a night guard position at the local shopping mall, I thought maybe I'd finally caught a break. The pay was better than anything I'd seen in years, almost too good for such a low responsibility gig. The hours were solid. 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Just one building, no driving between sites, no surprise shifts. Just 7 hours a night watching over an empty mall. Easy money, I thought. I pictured myself in the control room with my feet up, sipping coffee, while glancing at the screens every now and then, maybe even read a book if things were slow. I didn't know then how wrong I was. I didn't know that some buildings come alive after dark. I applied immediately. No second thoughts. Got a call back the very next day. A man named Mr. Hensley, the mall manager, asked if I could come in that afternoon for an interview. It felt abrupt. Most places like to drag you through a week of background checks, HR emails, and soul-crushing bureaucracy before they even let you see the workplace. But I needed the job. Rent was due and my fridge was empty. So I said yes, got dressed, and drove out there. Even in broad daylight, the mall had a weird energy. Maybe it was just me projecting because I was nervous, but something about the building felt too quiet, too still, like it was waiting for something. Or someone. The fountain near the food court had stopped working. A couple of pigeons flapped lazily in the rafters, and the whole front entrance was covered with a cheap vinyl banner that said, "Now hiring all shifts," in bold red letters. The office was tucked away behind the food court near the loading docks. Mr. Hensley greeted me with a tired smile. He looked like he hadn't slept in a while. Wrinkled shirt, deep bags under his eyes, and that pinched expression people wear when they've been dealing with more problems than they can fix. The interview was fast. Too fast. He asked a couple of questions about my experience, bare minimum stuff, and then launched into the rules of the job. Check the cameras every 15 to 30 minutes. Do patrols on the hour. Report anything unusual. Lock up tight. Standard procedure, he said. Nothing to worry about, but the whole time he was talking, his eyes weren't really on me. They kept flicking, toward the window, toward the mall, like he was listening for something or someone. Then came the part that caught me off guard. "Can you start tonight?" he asked. That gave me pause. Most employers don't start new hires the same day, especially for security. There are background checks, paperwork, ID badges, at least a day or two of prep. But this guy just handed me a metal keyring with a label. That said security, and a printed copy of the camera system layout. Sure, I said, trying not to sound too surprised. I can come back later tonight. His shoulders relaxed a little, like he'd been holding tension he didn't realize. Good. We've been short-staffed. Last few guys didn't last long. I raised an eyebrow. Why not? He rubbed his temples and gave a humorless smile. Different reasons. You know how night work is. Some people can't handle the silence. There was something in the way he said it, not just tired, relieved. Like I was taking on something he didn't want to talk about anymore. I took the key, thanked him and headed home to get a few hours of sleep. But even as I lay in bed, eyes closed, trying to rest before my first shift, his words wouldn't. "Leave me alone. Last few guys didn't last long. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just the graveyard shift getting to people. Isolation does weird things to the mind. Still, something about the whole setup gnawed at me. The rushed interview, the desperate tone in Hensley's voice, the way he avoided looking me in the eye when he said unusual. But I needed this job, needed the paycheck. And honestly, I'd seen worse. If a bunch of flickering lights and dusty mannequins were the worst I had to deal with, I could survive a few strange nights at least, that's what I told myself. The mall at night was nothing like I'd imagined. When I arrived just before 11 p.m., the parking lot was a desert of flickering lamps and shadow. What had been bustling with shoppers hours earlier now looked abandoned, like a forgotten monument to consumerism. Only a handful of cars remained, scattered like bones across a vast asphalt plain. I parked near the employee entrance and sat for a moment in silence, staring up at the dark, hulking structure. For a moment, it felt like the mall was asleep, not inactive but dormant, like a living thing waiting for the wrong moment to stir. Mr. Hensley met me at the back door right on time. He didn't say much, just nodded and motioned me inside. The corridors behind the storefronts were dim, painted in that soulless beige all commercial buildings seemed to share, and smelled faintly of old mop water. As we walked, he repeated the protocols. Check cameras every 15 to 30 minutes, do hourly patrols. Report anything strange, lock the office when not in use. Nothing I hadn't heard before, but then just before we reached the security room, he hesitated in front of a junction that split toward the children's play area. "Oh," he said casually, almost as an afterthought. "Keep an eye on the escalators and the play area." I blinked. "Why those two?" He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding eye contact. "Kids try to sneak in sometimes. Weird stuff happens there after hours. Nothing serious, just check in on them." He waved it off like it was no big deal, but his tone had shifted, quieter, flatter. There was something behind his words he didn't want me to ask about. I didn't push, just nodded and followed him into the security office. The room was a box, 4 walls, 3 monitors, a ratty swivel chair, and an overwhelming sense of neglect. One wall was stacked with faded binders and laminated floor maps. The camera feed monitors displayed the grainy black and white footage of various corners of the mall. Food court entrances, maintenance corridors, escalators, restrooms, dressing rooms, and store interiors. The images flickered occasionally, as if the building itself was trying to blink. Mr. Hensley handed me a keycard, tapped the desk with 2 fingers and said, "Stay sharp. I'll see you in the morning." Then he was gone. Just like that, I was alone. The quiet settled around me immediately. Not gentle, but smothering. The kind of silence you feel pressing on your ears. I sat down in the chair, adjusted the monitor, contrast, and tried to act like this was just another night shift. But even then, something in me knew it wasn't. This place had a weight to it, like it was holding its breath. I flipped through the cameras for a few minutes, watching nothing happen in 15 different places. The escalators stood still. The food court chairs were neatly stacked, and the play area, a rainbow mess of plastic slides and soft climbing structures, sat lifeless under the faint glow of emergency lighting. For a moment I relaxed. Just another big empty building. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I spun in my chair, heart in my throat, only to see a janitor standing a few feet away. He was maybe in his 50s, thin, pale, with a mop in one hand, and a grin that sat a little too easily on his face. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, amused. "You must be the new guy." "Yeah," I replied, my voice more nervous than I intended. "Didn't know anyone else was here tonight." "They always keep one of us around," he said, leaning against his mop. Clean up the spills. Make sure the floors are good for the morning rush. I nodded, unsure if I was relieved or unsettled. Then his smile faded. His eyes darkened just a shade. Listen, he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. Make sure you follow the rules. I frowned. You mean the protocols? He handed me the paper, and I unfolded it with hesitant fingers. It wasn't mall policy. It wasn't printed on official letterhead. It looked like it had been typed on a typewriter, uneven ink, old formatting, and it was titled, Rules to Keep You Safe at Night. My stomach tightened as I read the first few lines. Rule 1. Check the security cameras every 15 to 30 minutes, but do not stare at the footage for too long. Rule 2. Never look directly at the mannequins after midnight. If the mannequins change position, leave the area immediately. Rule 3. If a mannequin looks like it's following you, do not look back. They know when you're aware. I looked up, my throat dry. Is this a joke? The janitor's expression didn't change. Follow the rules or you'll end up like the last guy. I laughed too loud. What, the last guard? He didn't laugh with me, just nodded. One night, that's all he lasted. Right, I muttered, stuffing the paper in my pocket. Well, I guess I'll start my patrol. He stepped aside, still watching me with that unreadable expression. Take care. I left the office, the list burning a hole in my pocket, my thoughts swimming. Maybe it was hazing. Maybe the guy just like scaring new hires. Still, as I walked into the mall's empty corridors, the strange list echoed in my mind. The overhead lights flickered as I moved through the main hallway. The silence was unnerving. No music, no chatter, just the hum of electric ballast and my own footsteps. I passed shuttered storefronts, displays frozen in artificial poses, and turned toward the clothing stores near the play area. That's when I saw it. The door to one of the stores was open, not cracked, not ajar, wide open. The door was wide open. I stopped dead in my tracks, the beam of my flashlight cutting into the darkened interior of the clothing store. The space beyond the glass entrance was drowned in shadows, but I could make out the outlines of racks, shelves, and the motionless figures of mannequins posed in frozen gestures, arms reaching, torsos twisted just so in silent fashion advertisement. I hesitated. I hadn't heard any doors open. No alarms had triggered. I told myself it was probably just left unlocked by some careless employee. That's all it was. But the longer I stood there, the more the open doorway felt like an invitation, like something inside was waiting for me to step in. I took a deep breath and entered. The air inside was colder, as if the store had been sealed off for days. Dust hung in the beam of my flashlight. I swept it across displays and shelves, but nothing looked disturbed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught something move. It was subtle, just a shift, a flicker of shape at the edge of my vision. I turned quickly, pointing the flashlight at the back of the store, but there was nothing there. Just a cluster of mannequins standing stiff and silent near the fitting rooms. I exhaled slowly. My nerves were clearly getting the better of me. I moved toward the exit, telling myself it was fine, nothing was wrong. But then I heard it, a soft rustling, like fabric brushing against plastic. I froze, my heart spiking in my chest. I swung, the flashlight around again, landing on the mannequins. My breath caught. One of them had moved. It was subtle but unmistakable. It was standing closer than before, its arms slightly raised, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, now facing the direction of the store exit. I could have sworn it had been facing the back wall just moments ago. I took a step backward, flashlight trembling in my hand. "Hey," I called out, voice cracking with a mix of fear and irritation. Mr. Janitor, if this is some kind of joke, cut it out. Silence. Then came the sound again, a soft shuffle. Closer this time. I turned slowly, light sweeping the floor, the walls, the mannequins. Another one had shifted. Its head was now cocked to the side, as if studying me. They weren't all in the same positions. That much I was sure of. Panic crept into my spine. I backed out of the store quickly, heart pounding like a war drum. As I stepped into the hallway, I took a deep breath, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe I was misremembering their positions. Maybe the shadows were playing tricks. It had been a long day. I hadn't even had coffee yet. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. But not human footsteps. These were heavy, deliberate, and slow, like hard plastic scraping against tile. I turned and saw it. A mannequin stood in the middle of the hallway. The same one from the store. Same color, same torn sleeve, same chipped hand. It shouldn't have been there. It stared at me with its blank, expressionless face. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, molded features frozen in an emotionless void. Then it moved. Just slightly, but enough. Its arm twitched. Its leg dragged forward. The sound was awful. Plastic grinding against floor tile, slow and stiff. I couldn't breathe. Every instinct I had screamed run. So I did. I bolted down the corridor, my boots slapping the tile as I ran back toward the security office. I didn't stop to look back. I couldn't. I remembered the rule. Rule 3. If a mannequin looks like it's following you, don't look back. They know when you're aware. My lungs burned by the time I reached the restroom near the junction to the main hall. I ducked inside, splashed cold water on my face, and leaned against the sink, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. Then I looked into the mirror and saw her, a woman, standing near the stalls, back to me, wearing a plain cleaner's uniform. I blinked. She was gone. Just gone. My pulse spiked again. I spun around, but the restroom was empty. Nothing. Just me, my reflection, and the fluorescent hum overhead. That's when I remembered the paper. I fished it out of my pocket with trembling hands. The list of rules. I hadn't even read them all. Rule 4. Avoid looking into the mirrors of the restroom. Rule 5. If you hear someone talking inside an abandoned store, do not listen. Rule 6. If you hear a child laughing from the play area, leave immediately. Too late for Rule 4. I'd already broken it. I stared at the paper as a knot of dread tightened in my gut. These weren't silly warnings. These weren't hazing rituals or creepy stories told to scare the new guy. They were real. I shoved the list back in my pocket and stepped out into the hall again. The corridor was empty. No mannequin, no sound. But something had changed. The air felt heavier, oppressive, as if the building had shifted around me when I wasn't looking. The lights above flickered, and a low electrical hum vibrated beneath my feet. I glanced at my watch. 7:30 p.m. That couldn't be right. I had started my patrol after midnight. I looked again. Still 11:30. The time was moving backward. I didn't wait to figure out what it meant. I sprinted back toward the security office, breath ragged, sweat pouring down my back. The hallway seemed longer now, darker, like the walls were inching in around me. When I reached the office, I slammed the door shut and locked it. My hands shook as I dropped into the chair and stared at the monitor bank, the escalators, the mannequins, the dressing rooms. Everything looked normal, but it wasn't, not anymore. I stared at the monitors, trying to steady my breathing. Everything looked the same, still silent, eerily normal, but that only made it worse. The escalators remained frozen in place, mannequins unmoved in their stores, and the corridors stretched out like veins through the lifeless body of the mall. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, subtly, irreversibly. I checked my watch again. 11:30 p.m. Still, no movement, no ticking. Like time itself had locked up, trapping me in this twisted loop. I glanced at the digital clock on the monitor panel. It read the same, 11:30. Not a second later. My mind raced. I knew I had started patrol after midnight, 12:05 at the earliest. I had walked the halls, entered the clothing store, dealt with the mannequin, hid in the restroom. All of that had happened, so how was I back to 11:30? I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. My nerves were frayed. I had to focus. I had to remember the rules. Rule 7. If you check the time and it's earlier than the last time you looked, return to the security office immediately. I had followed that rule. I was safe, for now. But the weight of everything that had already happened hung on my shoulders like soaked cement. The mannequin, the woman in the mirror, the vanishing janitor. This wasn't just a haunted mall, it was something else entirely. The air in the office felt thick, like it was slowly being drained of oxygen. I adjusted the monitors again, flipping through camera feeds. Then I froze. The escalator was moving. Just one, the one near the play area. The steps rolled upward in a slow, grinding cycle. I stared, unable to look away, my mouth suddenly dry. There shouldn't be power to the escalators after hours. They were always shut down overnight. I remembered Hensley mentioning it. I remembered him saying to keep an eye on the escalators. Rule 10. If you hear an escalator running, do not investigate. Watch the area on the security cameras. Right. Just the camera. Stay in the office. I leaned closer to the screen. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. The escalator moved with its rhythmic mechanical hum, steps rising and disappearing over the edge like teeth of some enormous metal creature. But then the image flickered. Just once. A burst of static. When it cleared, someone was on the escalator, or something. I leaned in instinctively. The figure stood unnaturally still as the steps carried it upward. It was tall, too tall, and thin in a way that didn't make sense. Its arms were too long, nearly reaching its knees. Its legs were straight and stiff, barely bending as it rose. A dark, tattered coat clung to its body like rotting paper, and its head hung low, face obscured by tangled black hair or maybe shadow. I couldn't tell. Then its head turned, toward the camera, toward me. I recoiled from the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The monitors flickered again, harder this time. A loud buzzing sound erupted from the panel, vibrating through the room. White static washed over the feeds. I looked away, instinctively remembering the first rule. Rule 1. Don't stare at the footage for too long. I shut my eyes and covered my ears. The buzzing peaked, then suddenly stopped. Silence. I slowly opened my eyes and looked back at the screens. The escalator was empty again. Whatever that thing was, it was gone. But I knew it wasn't over. The silence that followed felt unnatural, like the world was pausing, waiting to see what I'd do next. My heart was pounding. I gripped the armrests of the chair, my knuckles white. I wasn't just afraid anymore. I was starting to feel hunted. I glanced around the office, half expecting something to be behind me. But it was just me, the hum of the monitors, and the brittle tension in the air. I had to hold it together. Just a few more hours. That was all. I checked the cameras again. All clear. The mannequins hadn't moved. The escalator was still. The play area remained empty. The janitor closet, nothing. I was about to settle back when I heard it, mumbling, soft, muffled, coming from down the hall, near the abandoned storefront I'd passed earlier. I swallowed hard. My pulse began to rise again. Rule 5. If you hear someone talking inside an abandoned store, do not listen. The voice was faint, too quiet to make out, but I could feel its presence pressing in, a broken rhythm of syllables, like someone speaking. Underwater, not words, not exactly, just sound meant to mimic speech, a trap for the ear. I backed away from the door and stared at the screen showing that section of the mall. Nothing, just the darkened hallway and the papered-over storefront. The mumbling grew louder. It didn't matter that I wasn't physically near it. Somehow I could feel it in my head, like it was bypassing my ears and burrowing straight into my thoughts. I tried to block it out. I muttered over it. I hummed to myself. Anything. The sound faded, finally, and I slumped in my chair, sweat clinging to my skin. It had felt like something reaching for me, something testing the boundary. I couldn't take much more of this. Then came the footsteps again. Heavy, scraping, like wood or plastic on tile. No, not again. I checked the monitor near the food court. There, it was the mannequin. It stood at the edge of the frame, 1 foot forward, head turned unnaturally, watching the hallway. It had followed me. I remembered the rule. Rule 3. Don't look back. Don't acknowledge it. I stayed glued to the screen, switching views to track its position as it crept closer, inch by inch, frame by frame. I could hear it now, even from the safety of the office, that awful dragging sound. I knew it was getting closer, knew it would keep coming as long as I kept watching. So I shut the feed. I turned away. I waited in silence, and eventually, the footsteps stopped. I sat there in the security office, paralyzed. My muscles trembled from tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying. My hands were sore from clenching the chair. I had followed the rules, or most of them, and it had worked. The mannequin was gone. The mumbling had faded. The escalator no longer moved. But I couldn't pretend I wasn't unraveling. The fear had sunk its claws into me, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold out. I glanced at the paper again. The rules, creased and damp from my hands, sat like a cursed relic on the desk. I read over the ones I hadn't encountered yet. Rule 8. Lock the security office door between 4 a.m. and 4:30 a.m. Do not open it for anyone. If they knock, they might not be who you think they are. Check the cameras to confirm. Rule 9. If you hear someone crying in a dressing room, do not open the door. Rule 10. If you hear an escalator running, do not investigate. Watch the area on the security cameras. Rule 11. Under no circumstances should you leave before your shift ends. If you do, you risk something following you outside the mall. I exhaled sharply. My watch read 3:56 a.m. I had 4 minutes before the next test. And then, a sound, a knock. 3. Gentle taps on the office door. Innocent, soft, but chilling. I froze, my eyes shot to the monitor. I flipped through the feeds, searching for the hallway outside. Empty, the knocking came again, louder this time. "Hey!" a voice called from the other side of the door, familiar and casual. "How's the night going? Still think the rules are funny?" It was him, the janitor. His voice was cheery, like we were just co-workers sharing a laugh, but something in the tone was off. It was too upbeat, too well-timed, like he knew what was happening in my head and was playing along with. As I backed away from the door, "Come on," he said. "I've got some answers for you. Open up, let's talk." I glanced again at the paper. Do not open it for anyone. The camera still showed nothing. I checked the hallway outside. Still empty, but the knocking continued, now with more insistence. Pressed my back against the far wall and waited. Then came silence. For a full minute I didn't move, didn't breathe, and then without warning he appeared on the monitor. Not walking into frame, not turning a corner, just there, standing right outside the office door. his head tilted, expression cheerful. But his body, it shimmered, like a heat mirage, like static bleeding into reality. He leaned forward, smiling, into the camera. And then his form began to flicker. First his edges blurred, then his limbs grew too long, his smile too wide. His body rippled like smoke, his features melting into a warped approximation of humanity. And just as quickly, he vanished. I staggered back toward the chair, knees threatening to give out. The clock now read 4:32 a.m. The knocking didn't return. Was safe for now. But the calm didn't last. At 4:45 a.m., just as I was convincing myself the worst might be over, a new sound broke through the silence. Crying. It was faint at first, barely audible, like a whisper caught in the air ducts. A soft, muffled sobbing echoing down the hall. A woman's voice, distant but distinct, gasping breaths between broken wails. The sound of someone in deep, hopeless sorrow. I swallowed hard, bile rising in my throat. I didn't need to check. I already knew. Rule 9. If you hear someone crying in a dressing room, do not open the door. I grabbed the flashlight against my better judgment and checked the monitor for the fitting rooms. Nothing. The dressing room hallway near the department store looked empty, but the crying continued, louder now, as if the source were moving. I leaned closer. A shadow passed across the hallway. Slow, fluid, something human-shaped, but off. A slight floating quality to its movement. It didn't walk, it drifted. The feed cut to static for half a second. When it returned, she was gone. I backed away from the monitors, heart hammering in my chest. The crying hadn't stopped. Now it was closer. I could hear it coming from the hallway outside. I covered my ears, hummed, did anything I could to drown it out. But the sound wasn't external. It wormed into my mind, twisted itself around my thoughts. It sounded sad, begging, like someone desperate for help. Please, it whispered, right at the edge of hearing. Please help me. I stared at the door, and then I did the unthinkable. I stood up. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Every instinct I had screamed no. But something else pulled at me. Some fragment of decency. Some irrational hope that maybe, just maybe, this was all explainable. Maybe she really needed help. But then I heard another sound. Not crying. Static. My walkie-talkie, which had been dead silent all night, crackled to life. A voice emerged, garbled, barely audible. But I understood one word. Trap. My hand dropped from the doorknob. The crying stopped instantly. Dead silence. And then, slam! Something hit the door from the other side, hard enough to rattle the frame. Again and again. The entire office shook with each impact, and then it stopped. I collapsed into the chair, gasping for breath, sweat soaking through my shirt. The monitors showed nothing. The hallway outside was clear. I was losing my grip. The rules were bending around me, testing me, seeing how far I could go before I broke. And still, somehow, I wasn't done. By the time 5 a.m. rolled around, I was a shell of myself. I sat slumped in the chair, bones aching, breath shallow. My nerves were fried. Every muscle in my body throbbed from tension. I had followed the rules, at least most of them. But the weight of what I had seen, heard, and almost done clung to me like cold sweat. The crying woman, the whisper through the walkie, the flickering janitor. None of it felt real, and yet it was more vivid than anything I had ever experienced. I kept glancing at the monitors every few minutes, waiting for something else to appear, to crawl across the screen, to knock on the door, to call my name. But the mall was quiet. Too quiet. There was a tension in the silence, like the building itself was holding its breath, watching me, waiting. I looked at the clock. 5:47 a.m., almost there. Just 13 more minutes and I could leave. I stayed seated, hands wrapped tightly around the armrests, staring straight ahead, afraid to blink. Afraid that even a moment of distraction might invite something in. Then, at 6:01 a.m. it happened, knocking. 3 steady, polite taps at the door. I jumped, heart skipping a beat, but this time the fear was different, sharpened by hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was it. Morning, shift change. I glanced at the clock. Again, it still read 6:01. A voice followed. "Everything okay in there? Your shift's over." It was Mr. Hensley, the manager. His voice was calm, even concerned. I scrambled for the monitor feed, flipping to the camera outside the security office. And there he was, Mr. Hensley, in his same wrinkled shirt and tired eyes, standing patiently at the door, glancing around the hallway as if just arriving for the day. He looked exactly like he had when I met him. No flickering, no shadow tricks, no inhuman grins. "Open up," he said again, knocking lightly. "You made it through the night." My hand hovered over the door handle, but hesitation gripped me. Checked the paper one last time. Rule 11. Under no circumstances should you leave before your shift ends. If you do, you risk something following you outside the mall. But the shift was over, right? The rule didn't mention what to do after. Only that I shouldn't leave early. Still, doubt gnawed at me. What if this wasn't really him? What if the voice was right? What if I had already broken the rules without realizing it, and this was the punishment? A trick wearing a familiar face. I looked back at the monitor. He hadn't moved, just stood there, waiting patiently. The seconds ticked by. Finally, I drew in a breath, unlocked the door and opened it. Mr. Hensley stepped inside, his expression softening when he saw my face. "Rough night?" he asked. I just nodded, too drained to speak. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I let out a shaky, bitter laugh. Something like that. I didn't tell him about the mannequins, or the crying, or the rules. Not yet. Not then. But I needed to ask. "There was a janitor," I said quietly. "He gave me rules to follow, said they'd keep me safe." Mr. Hensley frowned. "What janitor?" I blinked. "The guy who cleaned at night. Tall, pale, older." He shook his head. "There's no janitor on night shift. There never has been." My mouth went dry. The weight of everything returned, twice as heavy. Then who? But I didn't finish the question. Instead, I handed him the keys. I quit. He looked surprised but didn't stop me. I walked out of the mall into the pale morning light, the sky just beginning to shift into dawn. The cool air hit my face like a blessing. But even as I left the building behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, following, waiting for me to slip up. Whatever had happened in that mall, it wasn't over, and I don't think it ever will be. The air outside felt unreal, too light, too still. After hours of suffocating silence and supernatural dread, the soft morning breeze brushing against my face felt like stepping into another world entirely. But even as I walked to my car, I didn't feel relief. I felt watched. The parking lot was almost empty, just like it had been when I arrived. Only now the rising sun cast long golden streaks across the cracked pavement. I could hear birds in the distance, a car engine from the main road, the everyday sounds of morning. But none of it reached me. Not really. I got into my car, locked the doors without thinking, and just sat there for a moment. My reflection stared back at me from the rearview mirror, drawn, pale, eyes sunken like I hadn't slept in days. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled piece of paper. The rules. I smoothed it out over my knee, the paper now soft and worn from being folded and clutched so many times. I read them again, each one now etched into my mind like scars. They had kept me alive, but they raised a question I couldn't shake. Who wrote them, if there was no janitor, no night staff, but me? Where did the paper come from? Who had typed? It folded it and placed it in the janitor's hand? Unless he wasn't real either, or at least not human. The janitor had appeared without warning, knew things no one should have, disappeared like smoke. If he wasn't real, then why? Help me? Unless the rules weren't a warning, they were a test. That thought chilled me more than anything else. What if the mall wasn't just haunted, but sentient, feeding on those it lured in? What if the janitor was part of that? Either a warden, or something worse. What if the last guard didn't quit like Hensley said, but failed the test? And what happened when you failed? I sat in the parking lot until the sun had fully risen, until the shadows that clung to the edges of the mall receded, and the building looked like what it was supposed to be again. A structure of glass and concrete. And commerce. But it wasn't just that, I knew that now. Eventually I started the car and drove home. I left the mall behind me, but the feeling never really faded. That pressure, that sense of something unfinished, like I'd escaped a burning building but left something vital inside. I didn't sleep that day, I didn't eat. I just sat in my apartment staring at the rules. I thought about burning them, throwing them away, pretending none of it ever happened, but I didn't. Instead, I rewrote them, word for word, carefully, neatly, as if they were sacred text. I folded the copy and tucked it into a blank envelope. Then I drove back to the mall, not inside. I didn't even go near the doors, just walked up to the back loading dock and slid the envelope beneath the emergency staff entrance. Someone else would find it. Maybe not tonight, maybe not next week, but soon, because that place doesn't stop. Waits, and when the next night guard walks those halls, when the air grows still and the mannequins begin to stir, they'll need those rules too, and maybe, just maybe, they'll survive. Story 2. The Hidden Bar's Rules. There's something about new beginnings that always unsettles me, like walking into a familiar dream that's been altered just enough to make you question what's real. I'd only been in the city for 3 days, but it already felt like weeks had passed. Every moment stretched thin by the buzzing rhythm of urban life. I moved here chasing opportunity, a job offer that sounded almost too good to be true. Maybe it was. Back in my hometown, things were predictable, quiet. A small town where every face was familiar, every routine carved into muscle memory. People there knew each other's pets by name, birthdays without reminders, heartbreaks without explanation. I wasn't unhappy exactly, but I wasn't growing either. It was the kind of place where you could blink and suddenly realize you'd spent 20 years standing still. And I was terrified of stillness. So I packed what I could into 2 suitcases, left behind my little rented house with its creaky floorboards and sleepy backyard, and stepped into the unknown. The city was sprawling, loud and alive in ways I hadn't prepared for. My new apartment was wedged between 2 hulking buildings that blocked most of the natural light, like urban cliffs hemming me in. It wasn't big, just a cramped studio with ancient plumbing and a window that rattled when trucks passed by. But it was mine. A launch pad, I told myself. A stepping stone to something bigger. I could hear the city breathing around me. Sirens in the distance, music leaking from open windows, the occasional argument that echoed like a broken promise. I hadn't made any real connections yet. The office was professional but impersonal, the kind of place where people smiled without making eye contact. That changed on my 3rd night. A group of co-workers invited me out for drinks, a casual welcome to the team gesture, though it felt more like a test. Chris was the one who initiated it. Loud, charming in a reckless sort of way, always the first to speak and the last to take anything seriously. Eleanor came too. She was quieter, but her wit had an edge, like a scalpel. You didn't notice until it cut deep. Jason rounded out the group. I liked him instantly. He had the same unsure energy I did, like he was trying to find his place in a city that always moved too fast. We met downtown, a chaotic knot of neon signs and packed sidewalks. It was overwhelming but exciting. Street performers played saxophone, while steam hissed from subway grates, and storefronts flashed promises in blinking lights. The others led the way, weaving between crowds with practiced ease, while I followed just a few steps behind, trying to take it all in without looking. Too much like a tourist, we passed bar after bar, each one packed with music and bodies, laughter spilling out into the night air like smoke. Nothing felt quite right, though. Too loud, too bright, too curated. Chris complained about the noise, Jason muttered something about overpriced drinks, and Elena just rolled her eyes, already halfway into her second cigarette. We weren't in a rush. The conversation flowed easily, and despite myself, I was enjoying it. For the first time since I arrived, I felt like maybe I could belong here. The city wasn't mine yet, but it wasn't a stranger anymore. We turned down a quieter street, where the noise thinned out and the buildings loomed a little taller. That's when I heard it, a sound I couldn't quite place, like a low hum or maybe distant music, echoing from somewhere nearby. I paused, frowning, and glanced to my left. There was an alley tucked between two buildings, narrow and dark, barely more than a crack in the street. "Hey, hang on a sec," I said, mostly to myself. The others had already moved ahead, lost in their banter. Curiosity tugged at me. It wasn't rational, just a subtle pull, like gravity turned sideways. I stepped toward the alley, peering into the shadows. It didn't look like anything special. Dumpsters, broken crates, water-stained walls, but something about it called to me. I told myself I'd just take a quick peek, maybe see if the sound was coming from a hidden venue or underground bar. I didn't want to admit it, but part of me wanted to find something different, something unlisted, something real. I took a few more steps into the alley, the laughter of my co-workers fading behind me. That's when the air changed. The noise of the city dropped away, replaced by a strange stillness like the space between heartbeats. I turned a corner, then another, the alley stretching longer than it should have, curving into itself like a hallway in a dream. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I was already too far in, and that was the moment I realized I wasn't just off track. I was lost. The further I walked into the alley, the more the city seemed to dissolve behind me. The glow of neon lights faded like a memory, replaced by a dull grayness that felt unnaturally thick, as though the very air had turned to fog. The alley stretched, on impossibly long and twisting in ways that defied logic. Every turn led to another narrower corridor, each more crooked than the last, the brick walls pressing closer together as if trying to squeeze me out or crush me altogether. There were no signs, no graffiti, no distant chatter or footsteps behind me, just silence and the sound of my own breathing, which grew louder with each step. The claustrophobia was subtle at first, a whisper in the back of my mind, but it grew steadily, like a thread pulled tighter and tighter around my ribs. I should have turned around. I told myself that again and again. But every time I glanced back, the path I'd come from looked unfamiliar. Had I taken a left or a right? Had I passed that broken pipe before? I wasn't sure anymore. The city was a maze at the best of times, but this felt different. This wasn't just poor lighting and confusing street layouts. This felt deliberate, designed, like the alley was changing behind me, reshaping itself with every step. There was no signal on my phone, no Wi-Fi, no map that could help me. I kept moving forward out of a mixture of stubbornness and instinct. The way you keep walking when you're afraid stopping will somehow be worse. Then I heard the humming again. It was low, vibrating in the bones of the alley, almost musical, but dissonant, like someone humming a lullaby off-key. I froze, scanning the darkness for its source, but there was nothing. Just the same decaying bricks, the same flickering street lamp in the distance that hadn't been there a moment ago. I headed toward the light, hoping it would lead me to a main street or at least some indication that I wasn't entirely alone down here. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a street lamp at all. It was a small, flickering sign mounted above, a doorway, its green neon light barely illuminating the surrounding wall. The letters buzzed quietly, struggling to stay lit. At first, I couldn't make out the words. The grime and shadows obscured everything. But then the flickering cleared just long enough for me to read it. The Lost Bar. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, followed by a laugh that sounded more like disbelief than amusement. "Of course," I whispered to myself. The name fit a little too perfectly. It felt like something out of a story, a hidden bar you only found when you weren't looking, tucked away behind layers of concrete and bad decisions. I should have been creeped out, but honestly, I was intrigued. After all the stress of moving, of pretending I wasn't scared or overwhelmed, the idea of finding something unexpected felt like a small reward. A strange little pocket of mystery in an otherwise suffocating city. And besides, what was the worst that could happen? A sketchy drink, a weird crowd. I stepped closer, the green glow washing over me like phosphorescence. The door beneath the sign was old, wood swollen from moisture, paint peeling around the edges. It didn't have a handle, just a rusted push plate near the center. I hesitated, hand hovering for a moment as a chill passed over me. But the hum of the sign above seemed to beckon me, that soft electric drone like a voice just out of range. I pressed my palm to the door and pushed. It creaked open with surprising ease, the sound long and drawn out like an inhale. Inside it was warm, dimly lit. The change in atmosphere was immediate and jarring. One moment I was outside in the damp alley, surrounded by the cold breath of the city, and the next I was enveloped in amber light and low music. It wasn't a modern bar, not by any stretch. The interior looked like something from half a century ago. Vintage wallpaper, dark wood paneling, soft red leather booths. A jukebox in the corner played music I couldn't place. Jazz? Something older? It sounded like it had been looping forever. I stepped inside fully, letting the door creak shut behind me. It clicked shut with a finality that sent a shiver through my spine. The place wasn't empty, but it might as well have been. A few patrons sat scattered throughout the room, none of them speaking, none acknowledging each other. Their faces were passive, eyes glassy as if they were lost in some private fog. I felt like I'd stepped into a still life, frozen, painted figures pretending to be people. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, whiskey, and something faintly metallic. And then I saw him, the bartender, tall, still, and silent. His grey hair was slicked back, his face stone-like and severe, as if carved from something ancient. He was polishing a glass with deliberate slowness, eyes cast down, movements hypnotic. For a moment I just stood there, unsure what to do. This wasn't the kind of place where you shouted across the room or slid into a crowd. This was the kind of place that watched you back. I made my way to the bar, taking a seat on one of the worn stools. My fingers tapped nervously against the countertop. I didn't know why I felt so unsettled. Maybe it was the silence, or the too familiar warmth of the room, or the way the flickering green light outside still burned in my memory like a brand. Whatever it was, I told myself it didn't matter. I was just here for a drink. Nothing more. But deep down I knew this place wasn't meant to be found, not unless you were already lost. The moment I settled onto the bar stool, the room seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging my presence. The light in the bar wasn't just dim, It was soft, like it had been strained through amber glass. Shadows danced lazily along the walls, cast by antique lamps that looked like they hadn't been dusted in decades. Everything in the bar had an aged, timeless quality, like it had been perfectly preserved in a moment that never ended. There was no music I could consciously identify, just an ambient murmur playing from the jukebox in the corner, half melody, half memory. It was the kind of tune you didn't recognize, but somehow felt like you should. The bar counter was worn, but clean, its surface etched with faint scratches and stains that whispered stories I didn't want to hear. The bartender still hadn't acknowledged me. He continued polishing the same glass, the slow rhythm of his hands like a ritual. I cleared. My throat, the sound swallowed instantly by the heavy atmosphere. "Hey," I said, offering a polite half-smile. "Mind if I get a drink?" The bartender stopped moving but didn't look up. For a moment, I thought he hadn't heard me, or worse, was deliberately ignoring me. But then, slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes met mine. They were dark, almost black, with a dull sheen that reminded me of old obsidian. There was no malice in his expression, but no warmth either. Just stillness. He nodded once, barely perceptible, and reached for a bottle behind him. As he poured the drink, whiskey neat, without me needing to ask, I let my eyes drift across the room. The patrons were scattered sparsely. A man in a sharply tailored suit from what looked like the 1940s, sipping quietly by the window. A woman in a puff-sleeved velvet dress from another era, her eyes locked on the glass in her hands like it held her last memory. One by one, I scanned them, realizing that none of them seemed quite current. It wasn't just the clothing. It was the way they held themselves, the way they sat still for too long as if time didn't apply here. I turned back to the bar, unnerved. The bartender slid the glass toward me with a gentle push. The drink looked ordinary, but something about it shimmered faintly in the low light, like it held more than just alcohol. I picked it up more out of obligation than thirst. It burned on the way down, hot and sharp and deeply familiar, like something I hadn't tasted in years but once loved. "Thanks," I muttered. The bartender gave no reply. I reached for my phone out of instinct, thumbing through my contacts until I found Jason's name. Maybe he and the others were still nearby. Maybe they could come check this place out, share the weirdness of it with me, help me make sense of what I was feeling. I was just about to press call when the bartender's voice cut through the silence, sudden and low, like gravel shifting underfoot. "What do you think you're doing?" I blinked and looked up. He was staring at me again, his expression unreadable but somehow heavier now. The room seemed to tilt around his gaze. "I was just calling my friend. They're nearby. Figured they might want to check this place." "Hout, no," he said, voice cold and firm. "You don't do that here." My stomach dropped a little. I laughed nervously. "What, no phones allowed?" "It's not that kind of rule." He stepped closer to the bar, resting both hands on the counter. His eyes bore into me like twin drills. "First rule," he said, "you can't seek out the bar intentionally. It only shows itself when you're lost physically or emotionally. If you tell anyone to find it, they never will." The words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. None came. "Right," I said, attempting levity. "Got it, cool concept." I brought the phone to my ear and hit call anyway. Jason answered almost immediately. "Hey man, you disappear on us?" "Sort of," I said, glancing around. "I found this bar. It's tucked in an alley, real low-key, old school vibes. You guys should come." "There's nothing here," Jason cut in, irritation creeping into his voice. "We've walked up and down the alleys. You said green neon sign? There's nothing. No door, no lights. Are you messing with us?" "No. I stopped mid-sentence. Something had changed. The bar felt quieter, the air thicker. I could feel eyes on me. I looked around. Every patron in the bar had turned to face me. Not just glanced, not just shifted in their seats. Turned, fully, synchronously. Their blank, hollow stares locked onto me with chilling precision. I slowly lowered my phone. The bartender hadn't moved. But his voice, when it returned, was colder than before. "You broke the rule." I opened my mouth to protest, to ask how I was supposed to know, but he was already turning away. He reached beneath the bar and pulled something out. A small, yellowed slip of paper. He slid it toward me wordlessly. I picked it up. The edges were curled and stained, the text written in a tight, spidery hand. "These are the rules," it read. "You'd best follow them." And then I read the second rule, and the third. My hand began to shake. I held the yellowed paper in my trembling hands, my eyes scanning the list scrawled in tight, slanted writing. Each rule was more bizarre than the last, a kind of eerie code for surviving this place. If you see my reflection in the bar mirror, don't speak. If an old man sits next to you, offer him a drink. Never acknowledge the woman in the red dress. Don't turn around if someone taps your shoulder. Each sentence felt less like a guideline and more like a warning, carved into a tombstone. My fingers curled tighter around the note, the edges crackling softly in my grip. I wanted to ask what would happen if I broke them, but deep down, I already knew. The bartender had made it clear. This wasn't a game. This bar wasn't just hidden. It was alive, governed by rules that didn't belong to the world outside. I could still hear Jason's confused voice echoing in my ear. "There's nothing here, no door, no light." It made my skin crawl. How was it possible? How could I be sitting in a place that didn't exist for anyone else? I looked toward the entrance, half expecting the green neon glow to still be leaking through the cracks in the door. But there was no glow, only wood, thick and unmoving. I checked the clock on the wall behind the bar, a simple analog piece in die-brass frame. It read 10 p.m. I blinked. Had it really only been an hour since I left my co-workers behind? It felt like time had bloated and folded in on itself, like every minute here stretched longer than it should. I stared at the second hand. It wasn't moving. No tick, no glide, just stillness. A chill crept up my spine. I turned away quickly, trying not to let it get to me. I didn't want to believe that this place was real in the way haunted places are real, in the way curses are real. But my instincts were starting to scream at me. This bar was not a place you visited. It was a place you were taken to when something inside you cracked. I reached for my phone again, desperate for some kind of anchor to reality. The screen lit up, but there was nothing. No reception, no Wi-Fi, not even a battery percentage. The screen blinked once, glitched, then went black. Dead. I set it down slowly, my breath catching. Then, in the mirror behind the bar, something shifted. I hadn't meant to look. Really, I hadn't. But something about the reflection caught my eye. The bartender stood right in front of me, still and calm, but his reflection was wrong. In the glass, his face began to ripple like water disturbed by an unseen hand. His smile stretched, impossibly wide, lips peeling back to reveal too many. Teeth, rows upon rows of them. His eyes turned into voids, black holes with no light, no life. The reflection grinned wider, then looked at me directly into my eyes. It tilted its head, studying me like a specimen pinned to a board. I couldn't look away. Some primal part of me knew I was breaking a rule, but the fear rooted me to the spot. My mouth opened slightly, a breath catching in my throat as my lips began to form words. What? The mirror cracked. A long, jagged split cut across the glass like a wound. I gasped and tore my eyes away, heart thudding like a drumbeat inside my chest. I stared down at the bar, gripping the edges so tightly. My knuckles turned white. I didn't say anything. I didn't finish the sentence. That counted, right? That had to count. The bartender didn't move. But I could feel the pressure of his gaze, could sense that he knew. I tried to focus, to steady myself. But then a noise behind me made me flinch. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. They padded across the wooden floor like someone dragging their heels. I didn't turn, I didn't dare. The 8th rule, don't turn around if someone taps your shoulder. I held my breath. Tap. My shoulder twitched involuntarily. It was gentle, almost friendly. But it was ice cold, and it lingered for just a moment. Too long. My body screamed to react, but I kept my head down, kept still. One hand reached for my drink, anything to ground myself. Then a second tap. Harder this time. Urgent. The bar felt like it had shifted around me, like I was no longer the visitor, but the guest of honor in something much older than this building. I clenched my jaw. I didn't turn. I didn't blink. I just drank. The tapping stopped. The bar was still again, but now the air was heavier. The silence had depth, a pulsing wrongness that settled over the room like a storm cloud. I looked up and saw that the other patrons were watching me again, not all at once, but slowly, casually, turning their heads one by one. Their faces held no malice, no kindness, just that eerie, distant blankness. The man in the 1940s suit sipped his drink, never taking his eyes off me. The woman in the vintage dress smiled softly, her lips too pale, her teeth too small. None of them blinked. I forced myself to look away. The clock ticked. Not the second hand, just one loud, jarring tick. It was now 10:10. My stomach twisted. How could it have only been 10 minutes? That's when I noticed movement at the far end of the bar. A figure was sitting there, someone I hadn't seen before. Her skin was pale, her dress a deep red, not bright but faded, like it had once been vibrant but was now stained by time. Her hair hung long and dark over her shoulders, and her eyes, even from this distance, I could tell they were black. Not the color black, but the absence of anything. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She was staring at me, never acknowledged the woman in the red dress. My chest tightened. I looked down, pretending I hadn't seen her. I focused on my glass, on the scratches in the bar, on anything but her. The atmosphere changed, became denser, as if she had shifted the very air by being there. I felt like I was being buried alive by her gaze. The bartender returned to his silent routine, but I could tell he was watching. I gripped the bar and tried to breathe. I had already broken one rule. I wasn't sure how many more I could survive. I kept my eyes locked on the bar, counting the scratches on the wood like they were runes, wards of protection against what waited at the far end of the room. But the weight of her presence pressed down on me with crushing certainty. I could feel her stare as though it had mass, as if it were pushing into the back of my skull. The air around me had grown cold and heavy, thick enough to choke on. It was no longer just fear. It was suffocation. I didn't need to look at her to know that she hadn't blinked. She was still there, waiting. My fingers drummed quietly on the bar top in a nervous rhythm, trying to drown out the silence that had somehow become louder than any sound I'd ever heard. I reminded myself of the rule again: never acknowledge. The woman in the red dress. Simple enough in theory, but in practice, every part of my body begged to do the opposite. Curiosity burned behind my eyelids. I wanted to see her. Just one glance, a quick check to make sure she wasn't moving. But I knew what that would cost. The bartender's warning rang in my ears. If you look at her, she'll see you. If you speak to her, she'll follow you. Forever. I took another sip of whiskey. It was warmer than before, or maybe my throat had simply gone numb. I stared hard into the amber liquid, pretending that the world around me didn't exist. It was a trick I'd learned as a kid. Disassociation. You stare hard enough into a single detail, and you can convince yourself nothing else matters. But even then I felt her. She moved. It was subtle, but I heard it. A soft creak of the stool, a shift in weight. My heart stuttered. The room didn't react. The patrons were still frozen in their strange, slow rituals. One man stirred his drink with a spoon, his hand trembling ever so slightly. Another wiped her mouth with a napkin that already looked stained before she touched it. No one looked at her. No one except me. Almost. That's when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of fingernails drumming lightly on the bar top. Not mine. Not the bartender's. Her. The tapping was slow, almost playful, like she was humming through her fingertips. The rhythm was deliberate, taunting. Each tap struck some primal part of my brain, begging for acknowledgement. She was toying with me. The fear tightened in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Sweat began to bead along my spine. Then the tapping stopped. Silence returned like a held breath. And then, softly, so softly I almost missed it, I heard her voice. Would you like to dance? It was the most beautiful and terrifying sound I had ever heard. Smooth, melodic, like velvet dipped in poison. The voice of something that used to be human once, before it forgot how. It carried the illusion of warmth, but at its core was something ancient and empty. I clenched my jaw and said nothing. Not a word, not a breath. Would you like to dance? She asked again, closer this time. I could feel her behind me now, inches away. The cold from her body seeped into mine, raising goosebumps on my arms and neck. I could feel her breath on my ear, icy and wrong like the air inside a crypt. My hands dug into the wood of the bar. My knees wanted to buckle. My mind screamed, don't answer, don't move, don't breathe. And then, just like that, she was gone. The weight lifted. The air warmed. The pressure behind my eyes eased. I didn't dare look up. I simply sat there, hands trembling, chest heaving in quiet panic. I had survived. For now. The bartender approached again, silent as ever. He said nothing at first, just studied me with those flat, unreadable eyes. Then finally, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, he said, "You didn't break the rule." I nodded weakly, unsure if I could even speak. Relief began to bloom in my chest, only to be cut short by what came next. "There's more," he added. "Always more." Before I could ask what that meant, the lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. And that's when I saw him. An old man had appeared at the bar, seated just 2 stools down from me. I hadn't heard him enter. I hadn't seen him walk in. He was simply there. His posture was hunched, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low to shadow his face. He didn't move, didn't speak, just sat with his gnarled hands resting gently on the bar, waiting. I froze. Another rule came rushing back to me. If an old man sits next to you, you should always offer him a drink. It sounded so simple, polite even, but I had no idea what would happen if I got it wrong. Slowly, carefully, I turned toward him. "What would you like to drink?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. No response. The man didn't move. For a moment, panic licked at my nerves. Had I said the wrong words? Did he need a specific drink? What if he was deaf, or worse, what if he wasn't human at all? Then he turned. His face emerged from the shadow beneath the brim, and what I saw made my blood freeze. There were no eyes, just 2 sunken black hollows, vast and bottomless, as if someone had carved them into his skull and never filled them back in. His mouth opened slowly, and instead of words, a low, inhuman scream poured out. Distant at first, like a whale trapped in a tunnel, then growing louder, more distorted, until it filled the room with bone-rattling static. I gripped my glass with shaking hands, slid it across the bar toward him. "Take it," I whispered. "It's yours." As soon as the glass touched the wood in front of him, the scream stopped. The man turned back to face the bar, still, silent, as if nothing had happened. I stared in shock, heart pounding. I looked around. None of the patrons had reacted. No one flinched. No one even turned their head. It was like the scream had only happened to me. The bartender gave me the faintest of nods. "Good," he murmured. "That one's important." I didn't want to ask what would have happened if I hadn't offered the drink. I didn't want to know. Instead, I sat in silence, letting the weight of everything settle over me. My head throbbed with pressure, my body buzzing with adrenaline. I'd followed the rules barely, but I knew the night wasn't over. There were more pages to this story, more games, more warnings, more traps. I looked up at the clock. It was 11:30. 30 more minutes. 30 more minutes inside this place that didn't exist, surrounded by things that didn't blink, didn't breathe, and didn't belong to any reality I understood. I just had to make it to midnight. The bartender's words echoed in my head like a fading warning. That one's important. I didn't know if he meant the rule, the old man, or my barely contained composure, but it didn't matter. All that mattered now was the time. I glanced at the clock behind the bar again. 11:30 p.m. The second hand still hadn't moved. I watched it for several seconds just to be sure. Nothing. It was as if time itself was suspended, preserved in amber like everything else in this place. Yet I could feel it moving inside me, my pulse ticking like a metronome, my breath measured in short, unsteady rhythms. I turned away from the clock before I risked violating another rule. I didn't want to know what happened when you stared. Too long. The bartender hadn't mentioned anything beyond that chilling warning. Never look at the clock. Time doesn't move the same inside the bar. I didn't want to find out what that meant, not fully. My brain kept circling back to that thought. What if I was already stuck here? What if I'd passed some invisible point of no return, and the world I came from was gone? Jason's voice still rang in my ears, angry and confused. There's nothing. Here, no sign, no light. They couldn't see the bar, they couldn't see me. My hands trembled slightly as I brought the glass to my lips again. The whiskey didn't burn anymore. My senses felt dulled, blunted by adrenaline, dread, or maybe the slow unraveling of reality itself. Around me, the patrons had gone back to their silent rituals. A man refolded a napkin again and again, as though performing an ancient rite. A woman ran her fingers along the lip of her glass in perfect circles, never spilling a drop. It was as if they were stuck in loops, ghosts repeating the motions of lives long extinguished. I wondered if they had once been like me, outsiders, newcomers who stumbled into a place that shouldn't exist. Did they fail to follow the rules? Did they never leave? I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady. 30 minutes, I just had to sit here for 30 more minutes. That's all. No more rules to break, no more traps, just survive. But even as I tried to reassure myself, I could feel the shift beginning. The bar seemed to stretch at the edges, the corners softening like a painting that had been left in the rain. The lights flickered again and the air grew colder, denser. Somewhere the jukebox crackled to life with a warped tune, something jazz-like, but wrong. The notes wavered in and out of key, a melody trying to remember itself. It made my teeth ache. I gripped the bar tighter, grounding myself, and then I heard it. The slow creak of the entrance door opening behind me. My heart slammed into my chest. Rule 6. If the entrance door opens on its own, don't look. I froze. The cold draft rolled in like fog, brushing against the back of my neck. The rest of the bar didn't react. No heads turned, no one flinched. Only me. The weight of the open door pressed into the room, thick with suggestion. like a whispered invitation to make a mistake. A step. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, too measured to belong to anything human. Each one echoed as if the bar itself had hollowed, out to let the sound in. I clenched my fists. I wanted to look, wanted to scream, but I knew better. I had followed too many rules to lose now. I kept my eyes locked on the grain of the bar counter, studying its texture as if it were scripture. Another step closer, then another, and then a tap on my shoulder. My entire body flinched, jerking slightly, but I didn't turn. Rule 8. Don't turn around if someone taps your shoulder. My mind flashed back to earlier, to the woman in red, to her breath at my ear. Was it her again, or something worse? Another tap. Harder. I squeezed my eyes shut. I could feel it behind me now, a shape, not a person, not anymore. It radiated cold, a gravity of wrongness that pulled at the edges of my sanity. I could almost hear it breathing. Not loud, but soft. Steady. Too steady. Stay, a voice whispered. So close it felt like it came from inside my skull. I almost did. I almost gave in. There was something seductive in it, like surrendering would, mean release, from the fear, from the waiting, from the constant tightening of rules around my throat. But no, I wasn't ready to be part of this place. Not yet. I stood slowly, carefully, my legs trembling. I kept my eyes forward, every instinct in my body screaming at me to turn, to see what was behind me. But I didn't. I wouldn't. I walked toward the door, still open, still leaking cold. Into the room. Each step felt heavier than the last. The air thickened. The voice whispered again, "Stay." But I kept moving. Closer. Closer. My hand reached the threshold, fingertips brushing the frame. I braced myself for resistance, for something to stop me. Nothing did, and then I stepped through. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the cold vanished. The silence that had pressed against my ears like thick wool dissipated into the distant hum of the city. I stumbled forward, breath catching in my throat as if surfacing from deep, underwater. I turned instinctively, finally allowing myself to look, but there was nothing behind me. No doorway, no green neon sign flickering overhead. Just a narrow alley, littered with debris and blank brick walls. The bar was gone, like it had never existed. My mind reeled, struggling to make sense of the space I now stood in. Every detail of that place, the smells, the rules, the faces, was burned into my memory, but the physical world showed no proof of it ever being real. I reached for my phone. The screen lit up instantly. No glitches. Full battery, 4 bars of signal. The time read 4:57 a.m. I blinked in disbelief. Had it really been that long? It felt like only a few hours had passed, maybe 2 at most. I looked around. The alley was empty, silent, except for the faint rumble of traffic several streets away. The early morning chill bit into my skin, and a soft breeze carried the smell of wet concrete and distant exhaust. Normal, familiar, and yet I couldn't stop shaking. My legs felt unsteady, like I had been standing still for years. I walked slowly, toward the main street, hands stuffed into my pockets, afraid of what might happen if I stood still too long. Each step away from the alley eased the pressure in my chest, but the dread remained, duller now, buried beneath a surface of relief, but still there, coiled like a sleeping serpent. I didn't look back again. I didn't need to. Something had changed in me, something quiet but permanent. The city didn't feel the same. The buildings loomed higher, the lights glared harsher, and every alley I passed seemed to breathe. I couldn't stop thinking about the rules, each one etched into my mind like commandments carved in bone. Don't seek the bar, don't break the rules, don't acknowledge what doesn't belong, and the worst part, I couldn't prove any of it, not to Jason, not to anyone. If I told them they wouldn't find it, that was the first rule. The lost bar only appears when you're lost, physically or emotionally. I hadn't just wandered into that place by accident. It had called to me, found me in a moment of uncertainty and opened its door. How many others had sat where I sat? How many never made it out? I walked for another block, maybe two, before stopping under a street lamp. I exhaled, the mist of my breath curling upward in the dim light. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded. The city was waking up. The world was resuming its shape. But deep inside, I knew I'd left a part of myself behind. Or maybe something had followed me out. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.